button.
Yes,
And Peter, the floor is yours, Peter.
The floor is mine. Well, Bernard, we're discussing chapter 8 on the cybernetic understandings of consciousness.
Yes, okay.
I was wondering if you might want to give a synopsis of it, and then I can give comments on it. I think it would be good to have.
Just let me just let me get the book.
I have the book in front of me.
I need to read it, don't I? Make sure I don't miss any.
It's all about the consciousness.
I was trying not to.
Topic.
What I don't understand is how I've not got us in my diary. I must tell you, I've been ill for weeks and I'm not much better. Yeah. The current plague is a plague of migraines, but today it's not quite so bad. So, hello, Gerard.
Yes.
Yeah. I was saying I've been quite ill, which is very tedious. I'm just finding. Oh dear.
If you want, I can go through the sections and just.
No, I can do it myself. I just need to.
Okay. All right.
I found it. I found the page. Here we are. Okay. So just very quickly here. But for some reason, I begin the chapter with a quotation from Alexander von Humboldt. Everything is in interaction and reciprocal. Not quite sure what it means, that it's along the lines of everything's connected to everything else. So we're not going to isolate. Anyway, I won't go into that. It's just that everything's connected to everything else. Part 8 shows that using abstract concepts from cybernetics, we can combine biological, psychological, and sociological concepts to provide conceptual clarification and insight with understanding of human consciousness. Okay. I'll begin with a brief discussion of how the term consciousness is used and abused in contemporary neuroscience, cognitive science. And basically, I'm presenting an argument which says that people somehow have managed in the last so many years, 50 years, whatever or more, to invent something called consciousness as a kind of a substance or thing or whatever. It's some weird thing that people are trying to find out which part of the brain generates this weird thing. And I don't buy any of that at all. My position is quite simple. I say that we are, all of us, all biological organisms, to some extent at least, have got life in them, or you could call that awareness. Although you might want to argue whether amoeba have awareness or trees and so on, but which is what people are doing these days anyway. But we've got basic biological awareness, which is the liveliness of living creatures. They're alive. They function at a particular temperature, and things happen, and they reproduce themselves. They're autopoietic. They're very peculiar, a very special kind of thing. So I try and isolate brains from the rest of the body, or trying to identify specific mechanisms within that whole matrix or a whole stew of everything is in the body. It gets off from wrongly from the start. The second argument is to say that I particularly Warren McCullough and certainly Gordon Pask, possibly Heinz von Förster, use the word consciousness to refer to knowing with, which is generally applies to when two human beings are in conversation or interaction, and they are aware of each other, and they are aware that both of them are sharing some other awareness, that they're both looking at the same thing, or they're both talking about the same thing. So it's consciousness in the sense of to know with. And if you look far back enough in the etymology, you'll find that the early forms of consciousness that we use just only had that meaning. That they meant it for two beings to know each other. Now it's been stretched a bit certainly by Pask and many others actually, to say that there is a knowing with oneself, which occurs, and so we can call ourselves being conscious with ourselves, and there's still a mute point about to what extent we exclude creatures that do not use language in the way we do from the realm of conscious beings. I myself, when I had a cat, had quite a lively interaction with my cat, and we were conscious of each other in various ways, albeit limited. Okay, so I'm doing away with some kind of essence argument, and the qualia, I think qualia just doesn't make sense as a concept. I'm not sure what qualia are. So perhaps Peter can enlighten me sometime. Now, there's a section here called Reflex Cosmogony and Process Metaphysics. I'm not sure I'm doing that. There's certainly process. There's a lot of stuff in there. Yeah, I mean, I suppose one relevant point is that Pask makes a distinction between observing systems as living systems as observing living systems as taciturn systems, or observing them as language-oriented system. And he points out it's really down to what one's intentions are, what one's goals are, what one is hoping to learn in the interaction. And I could, for example, just deal with a person as a taciturn system. I'm not interacting with. Perhaps I'm engaged in some kind of operation, cutting the body open and so on, and completely uninterested in what the system as a language-oriented system has to say. It's just a question of perspective on that front, and I've already alluded to the fact that there are no neat boundaries around what language is or whose language is what. So I can talk to my cat. I can talk to any cat if I wish to a certain extent. Okay, and I point there a matter of interest that this distinction that Pask makes between those systems you can talk to and systems you can't talk to is pretty much the same as, not quite the same, but very similar to what von Förster said. Von Förster's distinction between first and second order cybernetics. Now, section 4 is models of learning in conscious systems. So I concede the consciousness before we start. We are conscious, we're conscious of that. And I'm interested, it's only a short section, there's a lot in there. I present two models where my interest is in making a distinction between those processes of which the learner is aware and can talk about, and those that she can't. And one model is a computer simulation of the processes that are involved in acquisition of a keyboard skill, and I use it. It's an explanatory model. It's not a simulation in the sense of it does what humans do and it learns this model that I've built, but it does allow one to distinguish the different parts of the model that correspond to the different parts or different stages in the acquisition of a skill. The thing of interest to me at the time I was doing this research was what are the processes by which how is it that skill behavior becomes automatic or procedural, and so that one can do things without being aware of them. You can drive a car while talking to people, and you do all sorts of things while you're automatically. You can walk along and you can talk, and so it's the acquisition of skills which become proceduralized. In other words, that happen without awareness. A fascinating story, and I did some research that showed that. What did it show? So I've been having migraines. Oh yeah, one finding very not surprising finding is that people who are I studied some trainee soldiers who are learning to do teleprinting, typing skill, and I discovered that if they begin from a state of innocence where they know nothing about the skill, they could quickly get to the stage where they at least know the layout of the skill, and they start to pick up some speed in terms of typing. But what I devised was a test which showed a paper and pencil test, which showed that there was a kind of an optimum period after a few months where the trainees had a very good knowledge of the keyboard and very quick at answering questions about which keys were adjacent to other keys, whereas people who have been touch typing for something like 3 years would not, because they no longer had conscious access to the layout of the keyboard. Everything was done as a skilled behavior, and what they did, when asked questions about which keys are next to each other on the keyboard, they would externalize their behavior by typing on a desktop, say, and observing their own behavior to see what was where, see which key was there. The only people who didn't do that were those who were involved in training other soldiers, and because they were continually refreshing their knowledge of the keyboard layout. The other thing I noted was that it was observed that if someone was typing and a trainee was typing and made a mistake, they become aware of the mistake before there was time enough for them to get feedback, get knowledge of results about their success or failure they themselves would know they'd made a mistake. And this, the argument here was that although the trainees acquire kind of a fast, fluent skill, they still have somewhere knowledge, we'll use that word, of how the skill works, and they are, and they have all the old knowledge of how the keyboard is laid out. So they've got a whole mesh of knowledge, but their aim is to do it quickly. So they just get to the nub, as it were. But there are occasions when they go to make a fast response, and they realise just as they've made it, or as they're making it, that it's wrong, and they become aware that they've made an error. They themselves tell themselves that they've made an error. You can probably think of anecdotes where this happens to you, when you just realise you've made a boo-boo without anyone telling you you've made a boo-boo. You just know you've made a boo-boo, so it doesn't, all your various forms of cognition related to the skill aren't coherent anymore. They've fallen apart, and you become aware of an error. So I suppose, what I'd like to point out, the computer program model is modeling the dynamics of typing. It's useful as a domain, as it were, in which to discuss learning and skill acquisition in general, and which is what I do very briefly there. I also present a figure on figure 14. It's a different kind of model. It's what psychologists call a modal model. Not quite sure why. I think there's different modes of memory modes or something like that. But I've used the form of that model, and I've got this is figure 14. If you look at figure 14,
I have a slide with that on it. I'll put
okay.
up.
Well, we'll come to that. But I just wondered how many
Here it
readers.
is.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Yeah, I just wondered how many readers, when going through the book, and with a very short chapter about learning and skill acquisition and consciousness, bother to look at that diagram, and then perhaps don't realise that it's given its completeness, it's probably as there we go. I'll put something on my screen. It's probably as good as the model you'll get anywhere in a standard textbook of cognitive psychology, because it's got the let's see, we've got the blue arrows are going in through, and the black arrows are feedbacks coming back, and the line's not there's an external feedback through the environment as well, which is that situated learning, external storage of information, which is a past aphorism, really, which memories in the environment. But it's we're stepping through it bit by bit. It partitions the processes of learning and being aware into well, just particular parts, really. But the whole thing has to work together. I'm going to leave it at that.
Could I interrupt you? Could I make a comment at this point, Bernard?
I thought I wasn't looking at it. I can see you now. You're commenting now.
Here, I'll stop this.
Oh, leave the slide up. Leave the slide
All
up.
right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the completeness of this representation. and particularly how one would possibly relate this notion of consciousness to the actual processing of particularly symbols, where the symbols are generated from sensory processes. So I'll leave it at that. Other than I don't find it to be sufficiently complete to be very useful, at least for my line of thinking. So
Okay, well,
I'll also speak to that. I have a similar kind of diagram that actually is it's very similar, but a little bit more detailed.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I say, it's sort of what the cognitive psychologists call a modal model. It's a stage view of memory, but when you've got all the feedbacks working, then it's obviously all one system. But it's useful for analytic purposes, I suppose, because people are always measuring things like sense. What is it? But the sensory processes. There's a, I can't remember, immediate memory, working,
and short-term memory,
long-term,
working memory, as you say.
Yeah. Well, short-term memory is used in general discourse. It's used ambiguously, but anyway, yeah, it's a stage model. But the interesting thing that I put in there, which is not normally in the working memory, is the seat of awareness. That's what what's in your working memory is what you're aware of at any one time, and so that's, it's the seat of conscious in that sense, and it can move around and also it can change its form in a variety of ways in terms of what it focuses on and what it's not focusing on. And
Its content. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and what's needed to examine that content. And there are people who do what's the word? Introspection, for example. I mean, all kinds of weird stuff goes on. I'm happy to leave it at that. Oh, there's a picture, I've lost it now, but there's the last paragraph or so. It tries to sort of set this, this prosaic business of learning, acquiring a skill into the broader context of learning and problem solving and being part of a culture. So it's all, we conscious beings are part of have the potential to be part of a culture that we learn from each other and so on. So it's a wonderful world, the world of being conscious in conversation with other people. And with every step along that way, we learn more about each other. So I'll leave it at that, Peter. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I have a series of, let's see, I have a series of points that we can discuss. Let me share my slides again. Can you see that?
Yes.
So by way of introduction, I'm a researcher and teacher. I come out of theoretical biology and cybernetics and systems theory, but I became an auditory neuroscientist, worked on neural coding of pitch and rhythm, which involves as one of the aspects of not only what's going on in the in the auditory system in the brain, but also phenomenally what we experience when we hear different notes of different pitches. And I've been involved in theoretical neuroscience. And a few years ago, I designed and taught a course on consciousness studies for basically undergraduates, students at the Boston Conservatory. And I've been involved in the arena, peripherally involved in consciousness studies, in the scientific approaches to trying to understand the nature of consciousness. And I presented a poster at the meeting in Berlin in 2009, and I've written some papers as well. I believe that organizational closure is critical to theories of conscious awareness. So I consider myself to be a fellow traveler of Pask and other people who have thought this way. I think it's helpful to, I mean, the chapter does this a bit. It's helpful to be aware and mindful of the different senses of the word consciousness. And it's extremely important to keep the distinctions between them in mind and keep track of when someone is referring to awareness versus something like collective consciousness. So conscious awareness is again the first person subjective experience. Searle says it's the difference between sleeping and waking. I think both Bernard and I would agree that this kind of creature consciousness or primitive awareness, basic awareness, is shared with animals. I don't know about all organisms, but certainly animals with nervous systems, I would tend to think. It's thought of as a property of individual brains. McCulloch wrote a famous essay, Why the Mind is in the Head. I can read. He says at the end of the paper, which was presented at this very famous symposium in 1951, convened by Lloyd Jeffress on cerebral mechanisms of behavior. He says, this brings us back to what I believe is the answer to the question, why is the mind in the head? Because there and only there are hosts of possible connections to be formed as time and circumstance demand. Each new connection serves to set the stage for others yet to come and better fitted to adapt us to the world. For through the cortex pass the greatest inverse feedbacks whose function is the purposive life of the human intellect. The joy of creating ideals, new and eternal, in and of a world, old and temporal. Robots have it not. For this my mother bore me. So I think, and I believe most of the early cyberneticists, many of whom were psychologists and neuroscientists, were thinking of in terms of awareness and properties of individual brains, rather than the sort of collective consciousness that we're going to get to in a minute. The current views of that involve the neural bases of experiences, so neural correlates of conscious states, waking states versus sleeping states, and the neural correlates of the contents of those states, the specific experiences that we're having right now. And the best current theories, in my opinion, invoke neural global workspaces, of which we'll say something in a minute. So most of the mind-body problem, as it's been discussed in philosophy and in the neuroscience of consciousness, is referring to conscious awareness. Now, there's a second way of thinking about consciousness, which is what I would call collective consciousness or common awareness, maybe, where there are common understandings among groups of individuals who are communicating with each other. You know, you could think of culture as being that, where you have socially mediated communications and conversations in the Pasquian sense. That is a different thing altogether from awareness. So it's important not to conflate the two. And some theorists, like George Herbert Mead, are radical behaviorists who deny mental processes and the individual self and individual conscious awareness, even. I mean, he goes very far on that.
Sorry, what? Say that again, please, Peter.
Well, my reading of George Herbert Mead is he's a radical behaviorist and very much an anti-mentalist. He doesn't. Maybe that's different from your reading, but that's how I take Mead, and that's what was causing alarm for me about some of the things you said earlier in the book about Mead. But we'll get to that, I think.
Well, I'd like to, if we could just do it briefly now. He has a key concept he called, which is the self as a social process.
Yes.
He's talking about selves and social processes and how
but
become persons.
My problem is not with the idea of a social self or a social consciousness, a socially mediated aspect of consciousness. My problem with Mead is he's an eliminativist, a sort of a denier of individual consciousness apart from social consciousness. And I don't know, I get the feeling that your position is similar to his, but I'm not sure about that.
Well, so I don't recognize what you're saying, Peter.
Well, do you think that you or I have an awareness independent of our communications with others?
Well, if we were functioning independent of others, like from de novo, we wouldn't be us.
Well, but would we have a self? Would we have an awareness?
Good self.
Well,
back to language, Peter. Language. Don't distort language. Please don't distort language. We use the term self to refer to relationships or the entities that make up a social collective.
So you defined it that way, but in the other sense of awareness. So, you know, octopuses are now thought to have awareness, some sort of basic awareness.
Well,
and they're solitary creatures. They're very solitary creatures. They're not social creatures. And I think that they very probably have awareness of a basic sort. But they don't need social interaction to have that awareness of you know, their own bodies and themselves. So that might be a point of disagreement between us.
No, sorry, I'm not. I mean, they sound very interesting. I'm not quite sure how one would. Well, but I know people have been studying them in various ways, but I don't know how they would describe what it is that they've discovered. That's.
Well, yes, it's an involved conversation because we're extrapolating from our own subjective experiences and the structure of our nervous systems way over to mollusks.
No, Peter, you're doing it again. You've done this. You suddenly started talking about the nervous system. Before that, you were talking about cells. I mean, either these chappies have got personalities, or you're talking about some brain configuration that they have, which empowers them to do certain things.
Well, how do we know that other beings or systems why do we think that other beings or systems have awareness? You know, we think that this is the problem of other minds. We think that other people have an awareness similar to ours because they behave in a way that's similar to the way we behave when we are having subjective
Yeah.
experiences, and they have nervous systems that are very similar to ours. So to the extent that they behave in a similar way that correlates with our internal experiences that we experience, and they have similar nervous systems, by parsimony, we think that they are having the same kinds of internal subjective experiences that we are having when we're behaving that way.
I'm sorry. Let me just say language again. Humans language together in if you use materiality, I'm not happy with it.
Yeah,
we
that's what we're
do
doing
all
now.
sorts of things, but it doesn't mean we can extract. That is a, what's the word for it? It's an emergent. You know, the way humans language is something emergent. It's not something that is shared in a nervous system. It's shared in the learning and the, whatever you want to call it, knowledge acquisition of a particular organism, a particular species.
Peter,
Well, all I'm trying to do is to be clear that you're defining consciousness in a different way than most of the philosophical discussion and neuroscientific
Absolutely.
discussion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Peter,
Peter,
could I,
I
I'm unclear about what you're saying. It seems to me that you have not made clear exactly what the presuppositions of your assertion are. And as I try to interpret the form of your sentences, they seem to suggest that the semiology is completely as total independence of the individual, from a mathematical perspective, as well as all other perspectives, that at the heart of the existence of the individual is this complete independence in almost a Descartesian sort of sense. I think, therefore, I am.
Are you speaking to me or to Bernard?
Yes, I'm speaking to you.
Oh, well, the individual is distinct from the collective. And I believe that, I believe that awareness is bound to particular individuals, but there can also be collective consciousness. So, and I agree with the Pasquian framework, which we will speak more. But I don't think, I'm not an eliminativist in the sense that I don't think that everything is socially mediated. So there are both individual awarenesses and shared awarenesses. And this gets to the issue of whether there are private languages, concepts and understandings of words, let's say, and public meanings or conventions that we are aware of, that we use when we want to communicate. But let me go on, because I just want to outline this so that we have, at least on the map, these different senses of the word consciousness, so that we can try to be clear about the different senses.
Yeah.
I'm against word policing, and I don't want to claim that one use of consciousness is correct and the other ones aren't. I think that people can use words, and as long as they define them clearly, it's fine. But we need to be clear about the different senses in which the words are being used. Another.
So you're using, your whole use of language is different from mine.
Yes, probably.
So
Yes.
I don't recognize any of that.
Yeah. Oh, well, all right.
Carry on.
So let's try to understand that there are differences in the way we're using those terms, and maybe we can have some clarification and convergence. A third sense is self-consciousness, that typically comes out of Platonic and Hegelian ontologies. That's awareness of awareness, or reflexive representations, or recursive processes, or so-called hot theories, higher order theories.
What about I think, therefore I am? Surely that's... self-consciousness, if ever there was any.
Yes, and I disagree with the Cartesian premise that that's the basis of how we know about the existence of awareness. I don't think that thinking is necessarily the hallmark of awareness. It's an aspect of it, but you know, we could say I feel, therefore I am, or I want, you know, I desire something, I have goals, therefore I am. All those things.
Well,
Let me go on though.
I mean, it's also
usually,
worth reminding also, Peter, that it's we human beings observing ourselves who make a distinction between thoughts and feelings. Otherwise, it's just
well, it depends on how you think about observing oneself. Whether you think of it as being a representation on top of some other kind of underlying processes, or whether you think that it's part of a self-production system. And we'll get to that. The fourth is an activist externalist conception of consciousness, which basically denies sort of that awareness exists. It's very radically behaviorist. Not all activists adopt this position, but some do. Whereas, and they think that mind and consciousness is not in the head, but in organism environment dynamics, let's say, as described in physical terms. So you eliminate all the descriptions of our own subjective experience. So there are areas of agreement and disagreement I think we have, and there are large areas of agreement. I think we both agree on basic cybernetic principles and radical constructivist epistemology, although we might have some differences about the nature of our constructivist epistemology. Organization.
I was being a constructivist before the term became common. And now it's turned itself into something called radical constructivism, this, that, and the other.
I'm thinking von Glasersfeld.
Well, yeah, he's just he's redundant.
Well, there are other varieties of constructivism.
Well, I don't like them.
Well,
I don't like the word.
Well, okay, that's fine. I mean, again, because there are different senses of constructivism, we have to be clear about about which kind of constructivism we're adopting.
Why I don't use the word.
And that's why I said radical constructivist. But so I think we both agree that organization is the basis for life, mind, and consciousness, and that organizational closure equals self-reproduction.
Mind.
The conversations, in the Pasquian sense, are cooperative coevolutions of minds. And I think we agree on basic ethical imperatives, you know, to increase choice, von Forster's dictum, and goals, you know.
Okay, well, is it possible to replicate the organization of a living creature in something other than biological fabric?
And I think probably both of us, well, I don't know. I think it's possible as long as you have the right organization.
Well, so I'm asking, is it possible to find this organization which you say is the basis for life, mind, and conscious? Is it possible to find it in any other kind of fabric other than biological fabric?
Yes, I think so.
Where?
I'll get to that. I will get to that.
Got a long way to, okay.
Well, next slide, basically, but let me outline some potential points of disagreement. I react strongly to human exceptionalism, this premise that only humans have language, reason, planning, self-reflection. There are lots of animal counterexamples.
It's down to how words are used.
Well,
I mean, the word language is from French lang, tongue.
So the problem I have with this is that it's defining language in a way that only humans have it. And, you know, the whole Chomskyan movement, which was imbued with this human exceptionalism, basically define language in a way that most animal communication would not ever qualify, and it was intentionally done that way. So and there are striking examples of, such as Alex the parrot, who can put together words. They can come up with new words. They can compose. They have compositionality, and they have all, most, if not all, of the capabilities of a human 4 or 5-year-old. So, and we grant children the capacity for language. So, again, I don't want to be a language policeman, but we need to be clear that definitions of language carry assumptions with them.
Yeah, it's the same with you. It's the same with, this is a world in flow, and there's a point where you might say that I am now talking to a child. Before that, you were talking to an infant. Before that, you were talking to some mewling, spewling baby, which apparently had very little awareness of anything going on around it. I mean, the phenomena are there, but you're putting labels on them. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's just that.
All right. So let me move on. So I think self-production is essential, but reflexivity and self-reference are not. And I'm extremely skeptical of Hegelian philosophy and its derivatives. We can come back to that. So many of the sort of tenets that I've come to realize, I didn't realize that second-order cybernetics and Maturana's philosophy assume all this until relatively recently. But I don't think that living organization is immediately equal to cognition or awareness, that these involve different types of organizations. That living organization involves an autopoiesis of material components and relations. Cognition involves basically an autopoiesis of neural signals. And awareness is dependent on regenerative neural signaling. And I'll get to that in the next slide. So I also just disagree that we shouldn't conflate purposive systems that have intent with language wielding systems. And there's, I'm not sure that you do that, but it wasn't clear in the section on taciturn versus non-taciturn systems. I think that ability to form concepts and compositionality comes prior to language per se. It comes out of basic mental operations and brain processes that allow us to make objects out of things. So I believe that there are both private and public meanings.
You'll find analogs of that in the world of AI. If one can say, if one bothered to put the labels on them, but we've got this, we've got this pattern recognition machine. It's forming concepts. It's noticing. Now, albeit within a larger class that it's already been programmed to.
Yes, although it should be said.
All I'm saying, past taciturn and language-oriented systems are two broad classes of systems. Some of which are living systems, some aren't.
Okay. Yes, I think I have a slide on my take on past, and we can discuss that. But the way that I think about this is sort of my equivalent of your figure 14, which I like very much, by the way, because it shows it's really a process model, and it shows both sort of conscious and supraliminal and subliminal processes. I've been trying to construct a model a generalized framework for thinking about the mind and the brain. And one can think of the nervous system as a set of loops, of regenerative loops, where you have local neuronal signal patterns that are being regenerated. Here the signal patterns are contingent on interactions with an external environment in sensation and perception. Perception is the organization of sensation. But in the center of it is a global loop in which neuronal signals are being regenerated in global circuits such that they become self-sustaining functional states of the system. And the analogy to that is, again, your assumption that our consciousness is basically coextensive with the contents of our working memory. So
Yeah,
I think we agree on that.
I was brought up as a psychologist that make that diagram. We go back to my diagram, Peter. Okay. Oh dear. Oh yes, you can. Sensory processes. Now it's got a mega feedback going into it below it, which
Yes.
is all from the rest of the body to do with kinesia, proprioception, and the vestibular system, which is balance,
Yeah.
interoception, which is our sensing of things inside ourselves,
Yeah.
algonic feedback,
body.
we feel some pain, endocrine and immune systems. I mean, they're all there doing their stuff, and they are affecting how we sense the world around us. Agreed with this sensory process are actually capturing the blue arrows are being captured. They're not going in. They're being invited in, as it were. And then you have the next stage is, it says filter non-conscious analysis. This is all the stuff that we've learned, or it's either built in or we've learned it, which analyzes what's going on through the sensory systems. And
Yes.
so you can think, if yeah, okay.
So I think we're in rough agreement. My belief is that those sets of signals that are regenerated in these global loops are the contents of our present awareness, whereas those signals, those neural signals that are not regenerated in global loops, are subliminal. So all those things that get masked out in perception, the activations of long-term memory that we're not aware of yet, all the things that are going on below our awareness are a result of these non-regenerated and local interactions. So this view of things is like, in my way of thinking about it, it's an autopoiesis of neuronal signals. And apologies to Maturana for using autopoiesis outside of organisms and components and relations, but it's a self-production system, and it's dynamic.
Why not call it a dynamic self-production system?
Well, I like the word autopoiesis as self-production.
But then you're going to confuse everybody on the planet apart from yourself.
Well, no, most people, I think of autopoiesis as self-production without the specific constraints of Maturana's patented use of the term. Anyway, this idea, I think, dovetail. I mean, it basically is a way of thinking about global workspaces, and the regeneration of the neuronal signals are a form of organizational closure. And that's what I was proposing in that poster in 2012. And when and when I wrote a paper for the workshop that Jerry Chandler and Gertrudis van de Wijver organized on closure before that. Basically, that this is the organizational requisite for awareness. That you have the self-sustaining regeneration of signals that then reinforce each other or don't.
Are you? I mean, I presume you're quite deliberately put the percepts and the motor commands close to each other because it's a circular system.
Yes, but these loops are not necessary. These loops are all interacting, and they're not all interacting necessarily through working memory. That's one of the problems with this diagram.
If you execute a motor command of some sort, Peter, like scratch your nose or pick up a pen, you will, by the same token, change your percepts.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. There's a feedback loop here.
Exactly.
You know, there are reflexes that are going through the peripheral nervous system. Well, they're going to the spinal. There's spinal reflexes that don't even, they're involuntary, that don't even make it up to.
You bet, yeah.
And there are as you say, there are automatisms that can be, if you train up, someone being able to drive or type, they're no longer even aware of this working memory. Those signals don't even make it into the global workspace. They
do if the operator, the person, what you want to call him, the system as a whole becomes aware that there's an error.
Yeah, if they attend to them, yes, certainly an error will or if they are attending to them, being mindful of those processes, they can focus on them. So the last slide I have, so I think that this view of things is compatible with Pask's theory of consciousness as organizational closure. And when I read Pask, and you're obviously the expert on Pask because you knew him. I only met him once.
Well, many other people did, and his books have been around for about how many years? 20, about 50 years. His books have been in print.
So Pask postulates materially instantiated end individuals that realize appropriately they're the substrates for psychological P individuals.
Substrate? That's not a Paskian word.
Well,
what do you mean?
You have to have M individuals to have P individuals.
Okay, well, we've got in the Paskian world, M individuals he refers to as autopoietic systems because he's primarily got in mind biological entities. Okay. He'd like to find alternatives, but he didn't. A psychological individual, a P individual, is by definition organizationally closed, and in Pask's mind, in terms of properties of systems, autopoietic and organizationally closed are the same thing. Yeah, it's just that he doesn't want to offend
Maturana.
So he don't want to offend Maturana.
Yeah.
So he will restrict autopoiesis as a term for biological systems.
Yes.
As you all know, very well know that Nicholas Luhmann did offend Maturana by using autopoietic for other than biological systems.
I take this to be I mean, the way I think of that is in terms of Aristotelian hylomorphism. You have matter and organization that's embedded in matter, and function depends on proper effective organization. The matter must be organized in such a way that it yields mental functions and awareness. And it must, that organization must be embedded in and situated in, embodied in some sort of material substrate. Now, this is not a dualistic system. It's it's a monistic system in which you have matter and organization.
We're talking about P individuals.
I'm talking about P individuals as organizations and M individuals as material systems.
No, if you limit yourself to that, so that there's a 1-1 mapping between a P individual and M individual.
No, not necessarily. There could be multiple P individuals in the given M system. Yes, I agree with that. I mean, you say that in the chapter, that there could be multiple P individuals inhabiting the same material structure. Yeah. I mean, you know, in my course on consciousness, we talk about multiple personality disorders. That's an example of where you have multiple P individuals, each with their own memories and personalities inhabiting the same brain.
No, there's a couple of things here which are worth pointing out. If Pasch wasn't interested at all in having collectives of P individuals, both within a brain or between brains, interacting between brains.
Yes, it says both.
All those things. If he wasn't interested in those things, he would just do what Terence Deacon does, which he has an organization which is a closed, a closed system in the sense that it's a self-reproducing system. He doesn't use autopoietic, but his concept of mind is of a unity, and is an
It's an organizational unity.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yes. So there are differences between Aristotelian hylomorphism and a Platonism that says that only the form of the thing matters. Aristotelian hylomorphism says that the form must be realized by some material substrate. You don't like that word, but
well, it's the same. You know, it was
must be embedded in.
If you're going to have a mind, it's going to be. These are observers' distinctions. To make a distinction between mind,
well, everything is an observer's distinction.
Well, yes, of course it is.
Of course it is.
Well, yes.
They're just words.
No.
Well, hopefully they're meaningful words.
Well, yeah, they can be. But I mean, this is one of the huge breakthroughs of the system sciences, is to persuade people to pay attention to who's making the distinctions, who's distinguishing the system.
Well, no, it's not who's it's not necessarily who's doing it, because that would lead to an ad hominem, sort of criticism of anyone. It's the framework by which they are making the distinctions that's important. That we always have to bear in mind what is the framework, the observational frame or perspective from which distinctions are being made. Who exactly is making it should not matter if you have intersubjective verification or calibration of our language and our measuring instruments so that we can see what other people see and hear what other people hear, and verify that we're in agreement about what we are observing.
Well, that's true within the strict confines of science, being a science, or indeed being a physical science.
Yes. Anyway, one can have P individuals with organizational closure at different levels, both individual nervous systems and or groups of interacting, communicating individuals. So I think that Pask had in mind that his view of consciousness is an emergent property of particular organizational form, whether it be in the brain, in an individual brain, or in a social interaction involving language. But the criterion is that there's closure under regenerative, mutually stabilizing informational processes and relations. So so this could be, you know, when you look at it in the lens, through the lens of the mind-body problem, the way people are thinking about this, it could either be an organization-based form of panpsychism, where you have consciousness on multiple levels, wherever there's organizational closure, or an emergentist theory where most material systems don't support P individuals, like rocks or streams or whatever, and the latter, and P individuals require a requisite degree of complexity that evolves over time. So you could think of, I think the past idea could be either fit into a panpsychist or emergentist framework. And I have problems figuring out, deciding between those two things. It's sort of like,
Well, I think it's in the name, psychological individual. We only refer to human beings as psychological individuals.
well, I would refer to an animal as a psychological individual.
Well, you're changing your language again.
Well, again, yeah, all right. So the last 2 points, I don't see any evidence in his writings that Past adopted Mead's extreme behavioristic eliminative social consciousness.
So I don't recognize. I read a lot of Mead. I've read a lot about Mead. I don't recognize what you're saying as being Mead.
Well, okay, but Past doesn't refer to Mead, and my reading of Past,
because Past didn't read Mead.
well, yes. So
I think there's one reference to him.
One thing about your book is that it sort of implies that the median perspective is connected with Past's. I think he's much more close. He's much closer to Piaget.
I imply it. I assert it. They're after the same thing. They want the, if you like, the psychological organization. They want to know what it is to be a person. And
yes.
in this case, he's.
But I don't think that Past thought of this sort of social determinist view. He refers to a book about how individuals and groups can change the course of the thinking within groups, for example. So there's some individual autonomy apart from the group.
I should hope so. Otherwise, it's not a human group. It's something else.
I'm just saying that this is my take on Past. The last point is that I think that there is a connection and an interconnection, possibly an intellectual connection between the contemporary neuroscience theory of neural global workspaces, involving self-sustaining activity global circuits, and Past's notion of organizational closure through self-production. I think there's a
so you've got this workspace is obviously some scientists metaphor or term used to refer to what?
A set of regenerative neural signals in global circuits.
So why is it a workspace?
That's because Bernie Bars coined the word, that term back in the 90s.
Yeah, I remember.
And he was thinking in terms of he comes out of cognitive science, and they were thinking about information processing sorts of models. So that's the only reason why workspace is in there. But you can think, I mean, it's like working memory, right? Working memory is a workspace in that sense. But what I'm trying to
Yeah, but
say
it's,
is that there's a
it's
way
not-
of thinking about, there's a
A
way of,
working memory is a very particular abstraction. You've got the brain sitting there, and somewhere in that brain you can say, well, there's working memory at work in that brain, but that working memory is defined by it belonging to a person and contributing to how they
yes,
behave in the work. But it's the person.
yes, it's
Person
in the brain of the person. And you know, right now there's been a lot of work in the last 2 decades elucidating the neuronal processes that are going on in working memory, and you know, they're far from understanding what the contents of working memory are per se, but people have been recording from animal and human brains and looking at the neural processes that are going on when we hold some item in working memory. But my point, I don't want to lose my point, is that past theory is very general. It's an organizational theory of consciousness. It applies to both awareness in brain. It can apply to awareness in brains and conversations within brains, as well as conversations between brains and individuals. You know, that are mediated by language and social interactions. So I'm just saying that there's a rapprochement there that's possible. And I'm trying to make that linkage as a possible thing for consideration.
Yeah, the other thing that I'd express it, put it differently, would be that P-individuation is a term that Pascal used. P-individuation is a term. I mean, it's an emerging process. You know, you don't have no P-individual, then suddenly you have one. You know, there's kind of a gradualist emergence as an infant turns into a toddler and into a small child, and eventually into what you might recognize as a you know, a responsible adult or late adolescent. I mean, it's a
well, there is some debate about whether adolescents are people, but I just say that jokingly.
I personally never grew up, so I don't know.
Right. Anyway, yes, I agree. I agree with that.
So it's
and that actually the question of infinite awareness is also an open question. It's like, again, it's like animal awareness. You know, what point do you start to think that the infant has consciousness? And it's an open question.
Could I interrupt again? This has been a dyadic conversation between you two, which has been very, very difficult for me to follow. And the failure to allow sentences to be completed simply makes it extraordinarily difficult for the listeners, and the effective communication to the Club of Remy as a whole, as compared to the individual positions you both are defending, and both are defending very well. I don't have any comments with that immediately, but I think others in the group would also like to participate in this conversation and turn it from a dyadic conversation into a more general one. So that's my comment, and it really would be helpful to the listeners if both of you would allow the others to finish their sentences, so the listener can somehow understand what your goals are and what your purpose of making that sentence is.
Yeah, Bernard, please let Peter complete his whole presentation before you want to jump in.
Well, I could
Well,
joke.
I apologize as well. I break in when so. Again, we have
Strong mind.
we have more than half an hour, so let's engage in a general conversation.
All right, let me start with the last line of your slide, which says contemporary neuroscience theory. But then it goes to some sort of connection between global workspace, I don't, and the notion of self-production, which somehow I presume is related up to Aristotelian hylomorphism of matter. Could you clarify what you're meaning by the notion of work in terms of work as being a process of doing something, and how that all fits together in your mind, Peter?
Well, I don't think you should get hung up on the workspace word, because I did mention that, you know, it was coined by Bernie Bars, and it's in honor of him that word persists. But if
well, it's a very
if,
common word, Peter. I'll interrupt you this time. You've said that several times. That workspace.
It's not my word.
Excuse me. You've said several times that we shouldn't get hung up on the workspace. Yet it's a very common concept in the discussion of consciousness and the recent discussions with the Club of Remy with regard to the notion of a global workspace. So it seems to be somehow related to your notion of self-production and somehow related to your notion of hylomorphism.
Yes.
I don't see the connections.
All right. Well, so workspace. So workspace, you know, I would show a picture of my desk right now, but you know, a workspace is a space in which you can put things in temporarily, like a blackboard. And you can erase them. It's labile memory. It's the contents of what you are attending to at the moment. It's like working memory. Again, there's that word work, but it's got contents of signals that you're interested in, that you're using right at the moment. So that's why it's called a workspace. These global circuits, so if I say the word elephant, you know, and I'm going to ask you in a minute what word I said, you're going to keep that word, you know, you can think of what I just said, that word, you can recall it and keep it in your labile short-term memory as a working signal that you're going to use. Now, the signals that are in these global circuits are maintained there temporarily, and sets of them are interact and dynamically self-produce each other. So because I said the word elephant, all your memories of elephants and books you've read and times when you've been to the zoo or seen things about them are being primed in your brain, in your mind. And so if we think about the neuronal signals interacting with each other and either reinforcing, sets of them reinforce each other and mutually stabilize each other, or they suppress other senses of it, then if I started talking about the Republican Party and elephants, that will direct your attention towards the other senses of the word elephant or other meanings of that.
Okay, so
there's
from
an
my
organizational...
understanding of what you've just said in several sentences, you've drawn very extensively on the computational aspects of how electronic computers work.
No, not necessarily computers.
That's my interpretation of what, in terms of being the processing of, if you would, in your mind, as I understand it, in concepts of how neural systems work, without directly addressing either the self-production of it or the hylomorphic parts of it.
When you have a global circuit that's completed, so when we see something and we're aware of it, there's initially activity in our occipital lobe in the visual areas. Then there is activity in frontal and parietal areas. And then there's a wave of activity that goes back to the visual areas. Now, neuroscientists have found that when there is the completion of this loop, in other words, the signals can be self-sustaining, we are consciously aware of the visual stimuli that we're being presented with. And if there isn't completion of this global loop, it's subliminal. We're not aware that we saw anything. So when you have this self-sustaining set of neuronal signals, we don't know the nature of the neural signals precisely. That's the neural coding problem. But when you have these self-sustaining signals such that you have the completion of a loop, then that's a self-production. It's just like in an autopoietic system, except with neural signals, it's just like in an autopoietic system when you have completion of a loop of material component and relation self-production.
Yeah, but
Your meaning is now clear to me. Okay.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you.
Okay, in the sense that you're taking the notion of global workspace not to be a, if you would, some global thing, but rather the transformations of information transformation of signals, if you would, between different anatomical portions of the brain.
Well, we're within
And that
loops.
this must be a coordinated and temporal sort of interaction between different anatomical subsections of the brain. Correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Peter, just remind you, I question your use of the term autopoiesis as being fitting for what your theory is about. When you say self-production, my understanding of autopoiesis, it means self-creating. Now, bits of the brain aren't self-creating. I don't quite.
The signals are. The signals are.
But Peter, what in this same notion of trying to get at what you're relating to or referring to, or what your reference system is from a semiotic point of view, is what do you mean by the word signal in this sense?
A signal in this sense is a distinction that's being made by the brain that switches behavior or internal state in some way. Now, what we would label as a signal as an observer would be we would need to observe some aspect of neuronal activity, and that would need to be correlated with observables related to subsequent behavior or internal functional state, shall we say.
Okay.
So I worked on the neural coding of pitch, and in my terms, a code necessitates that it has a functional role, an interpretation by the system that switches behavior. So
okay, I grasp that at the level of interpretation of sound. But do you also consider sodium-potassium exchanges across the membrane to be a signal?
it could be within the context of it could be within the context of neuronal behavior. Yes. So there are signals that you can distinguish depending upon your observational frame. You can distinguish signals at different levels. Distinctions
And
that
so
we
then
made.
your notion of the various forms of consciousness, as you listed at the very beginning, somehow take the notion of signal to be able to be used at anywhere from the atomic level to the interpersonal level. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
Well, this is my view of. You asked me about semiotics. I have a theory of system semiotics that applies to inanimate and animate systems. So that an observer can, if you can find distinctions that switch the behavior of a system, such as, say, the influx of sodium ions, then you can, and you have a framework that makes sense to describe that as a distinction, then you can call it a signal. Yes, but that is not necessarily. I think that awareness is dependent on a self-production of signals, of distinctions.
So then, okay, so perhaps my interpretation was correct, that you use the notion of signal in a way that could mean anything from effectively a quantum level change of electrical form all the way up to interpersonal connections.
Only if there's an organization in place that will switch the system based on that distinction. So I agree with Bernard about distinctions and the importance of distinctions as being primitives.
Say that, didn't say that, carry on.
Well, all right, that's what I read in your chapter. But so I think that you need to have a system that can be described. So taking the point of view of an external observer, the system needs to be able to make distinctions in order for there to be any kind of awareness. If you didn't have coherent distinctions, you couldn't regenerate those, the neuronal activity patterns that implement those distinctions or realize those distinctions within the system. I know it's,
I can think of a simple counterexample of that. But
all right, well, go for
it. Well, take a constant tone that goes on and on and on. Yeah. And so that the system has adapted to that as being consistent with its environment, with its context.
Yeah.
Okay, so at a certain point, the awareness of that constant signal is going to be ignored.
Yes.
That's called habituation, Jerry.
Yeah, habituate.
I know what it's called, Peter. I'm just Bernard. I know what it's called. I'm just taking it as a counterexample to what he said.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, there, of course, in the auditory nerve's firing away just as it was before. But at the level of the thalamus, because the circuits that go through the basal ganglia that determine whether signals from the thalamus are going to make it into the auditory cortex are being basically, normally when we are attending to something, those circuits are disinhibited, and therefore the signals come through. But once we hear a tone, once there's a tone that's been going on for a long time, those circuits habituate, and it reverts to the normal state of affairs, which is inhibition. So we're no longer aware of it because those signals are not making it into the global loops. That would be my take on that.
I agree with your interpretation.
Yeah.
I agree
Yeah.
with your
Oh, thank you.
interpretation.
Thank you. So, I mean, there are all sorts of famous examples of attentional blindness. Where there's a famous film of the people passing the basketball around, and then and you're asking people to attend to how many times the basketball gets passed. And meanwhile, in the midst of it, a person in a gorilla suit comes across the background, and most people aren't aware that that there's a person in a gorilla suit in the movie, and that's the power of how the attentional systems that are mediated by the basal ganglia can dramatically affect what we're aware of.
Bernard, could I ask you a question about an area that is modern and sort of puzzling to me? There is recently, in the last 10 or 15, 20 years, probably, a genetic variant among human beings, which is called aphantasia. And people with aphantasia lack the ability to re-envision a scene or a situation. And it doesn't seem to influence their other forms of mental capabilities. And so at first I just couldn't believe that such a thing could exist, because the ability to re-envision symbols and sequences and this sorts of, well, for example, musical notes. This re-envisioning process has seemed to be so intrinsic to human consciousness that I couldn't imagine people not being able to re-envision things. Well, I was wrong. And so how would you interpret it, the notion of aphantasia as a genetic lesion with regard to human consciousness?
But first,
Have meaning in human consciousness.
can I ask you, how do you spell that? Is it aphantasia?
A-P-H-F-A, P-H-A,
A-P-H.
like fantasy.
Or imagery.
Okay.
You can't.
Aphantasia. No fantasies.
Right. Well, it's not just no fantasies, it's the inability to re-envision.
Yeah, it's the label they've chosen to use.
Well, no, it's more important than that, Bernard.
I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying that that's what
these people can envision others or can have fantasies about all sorts of things. One of my friends who has aphantasia is a well-published poet. So it's not just the absence of fantasy, of meaning,
okay.
It's something else.
Right. So could you just again give me an example of this aphantasia at work or not at work? What?
Yes, this poet cannot recall the face of her father. She cannot, she has many memories of her father, who she's very tightly attached to, but she cannot bring back an image in her mind of her father.
And there are other people who have similar selective remembering.
Yeah. Well, there's several thousand have now been. Well, it's not selective memory. There's several thousand of them have now been identified, and I presume that the geneticists are working on finding genes for that. I don't know.
I mean, they are the system, and the system is selectively remembering things. Some things it doesn't remember. That's what you said. Oh, I can't recall.
I used the word re-envisioning.
Re-envisioning. Okay. Sorry, that's that. No, it's new to me, Jerry. I'll have to think about that because it sounds first hearing it sounds like it shouldn't work at all.
Exactly my response.
Yeah.
Well, I think the way, and I'm not familiar with the thinking about this particular deficit, but the way that neuroscientists would think about it would be that when we have imagery, we are generating signals from some area some related to something that we know about, that we have cognitive access to, like our parents, what our parents' faces look like, or what our car looks like, or what our front door of the house we grew up in looked like, and that those signals are then sent to specific sensory areas that then activate neural assemblies in those areas. So if there was some deficit in transmitting those neuronal patterns to the sensory areas involved, then you could have deficits in, say, visual imagery and not auditory imagery, or vice versa. Or imagining what a rose smells like. That would be one way of thinking about it. There is a literature in cognitive science and in computer science, computational neuroscience, on perceptual symbols. Barsalou has a theory of perceptual symbols in which Barsalou, Barsalou, and Elias Smith has a framework for semantic pointers. So you can have symbols that are formed out of collections of attributes, and the symbols can be activated from bottom-up inputs, but also from top-down inputs, so as to facilitate imagery. So these are thought of as semantic nodes, or conceptual nodes, that can be accessed either way. So if you're interested in that, I would look into that literature and how they are thinking about it.
Is this recent developments? Barsalou, Barcelus?
Barsalou.
No.
He had a Target article in Behavioral and Brain Sciences circa 1999, but he's also written about it since. And Elias Smith, I think it's How to Build a Brain, maybe. That's coming out of computer science and cognitive computational.
Professor Lawrence Barsalou, Barsalou.
Yeah.
I read him way back when.
So this goes with this
France, blah 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 blah. Yeah, he's a cognitive scientist chap. Yeah.
This goes with the sort of idea that the brain is not a digital system completely. It's a mixed analog digital system. And the symbols are sort of the nexus between the digital and the analog.
Peter, if there's just a moment now, you use the term Aristotelian hylomorphism. I think last time we spoke, and I'd forgotten it, but now I looked at it, and you've got it on your slide, what I'm looking at the moment, saying at the top, matter plus organization. Now, I've just done a quick look because I wanted to check what the actual Greek was. I'm told it's quite straightforwardly, this hylomorphism is, how to put it, Aristotle famously contends that every physical object is a compound of matter and form.
Mm-hmm.
Form is not
organization is form, but it's not Platonic form. It's not independent of the matter.
No, I'm not saying it is, but it's not an organization. Not as we would, not as one would
I
normally.
think that's the way to read form. It's organization.
And Aristotle uses the word psyche to refer to organization.
Yes,
creatures.
yes. There's a very good book by Deborah Modrock on Aristotle's theory of mind. And she goes into how Aristotle thought about psyche.
Yeah, but you're using morphism. Morphism is just form. That's not psyche.
Form is often confused with organization. I
Well,
think
yeah,
organization is much closer to the meaning of it, at least the way that I see it. I'm very suspicious of people who try to go back to the original meanings of words. I don't think that the original meaning necessarily, or is sacred in that way. And I think that Aristotle's philosophy is much better understood and not confused with Platonic form if you use the word organization. Theoretical biology is all about organization.
Yeah, but it is. That's why Aristotle is known as the father of biology, and that's why he uses psyche to refer to the particular form that living creatures have, whether they're plants, animals, or human beings.
Yes,
But
and
he
also
uses-
particularly in terms of mind.
Peter,
that's later.
Peter, your statement that you don't rely a great deal on the historical origins of words, at least as I interpret yours, leads the listener to great confusions, or at least to this listener.
I'm sorry.
Particularly, for example, the hylomorphism is almost an alternative definition of the chemical sciences.
No, I wouldn't say that. Well,
I mean, that's the Journal of Philosophy of Chemistry is called Hyle, in recognition of that historical usage. So it really makes it, and well, anyway, I'll stop there. Let others participate. I've talked too much already.
I agree with you. I think you would I was going to think, I think it's possibly Spencer Brown, if finally was persuaded me how important etymology is. But I was already aware of it before that. But he goes to town on it on those four. And I'm thoroughly persuaded that the more one knows about word origins, the better. It's good for you.
I agree with that. I agree. I think the word origins are useful in clarifying the ideas.
While I'm at it, have you ever read anything by I'm getting tired now. Hacker, a Cambridge, England, Cambridge philosopher, Wittgensteinian philosopher, called Hacker. I've forgotten his first name. Hacker. Okay, well, about 20 years ago now, he gave a talk or a speech or wrote a paper in which he threw a gauntlet down to the consciousness studies community and challenged them that they hadn't got a clue what they were talking about. In others, they were talking Wittgensteinian nonsense. Now, he very kindly, well, not to me in particular, but discussion of how the term consciousness came to mean roughly what we're using today, or what the other people do in the consciousness field, the consciousness community. And it turns out that 2,000 years ago, the usage wasn't there, and it bit by bit it grew in quite a nice. Its usage was taken over in various ways, and he documents this. He does this just as background, and then he does his critique. But what I'd like to do, if you're happy, I'll send you. I can either give you a link to his paper. I'll send you a copy of his paper.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. I have a question to all of you. In the end of the day, what do you guys think the consciousness really is? Is it a thing, or is it a process, or is it an emergence phenomenon? Which one would be your vote?
All of the above, maybe.
No, you can only choose
No, it's
one.
not a thing. It's
I mean,
not a
choose
thing.
one.
It's not a thing.
Well, it depends what you mean by a thing.
Yeah.
We're just
A
lucky. We're
thing,
just
well, a noun, something that you guys talking about the essence, right?
no,
Essence,
really,
No, I wouldn't say that, but
see, Jason.
yeah.
Well, there's everything about you is exactly the same, with or without. If you don't have, if you're you and you do not have any consciousness, what state are you in?
Well, Peter mentioned in one of his slides that it is something between awake and sleep. So,
Is that
I'm
different.
all, yeah, the difference is there. So I'm more focused on that. And I would like to figure out, I mean, if it is a process, then what thing is turning it on? And when we get all very sleepy, what thing is turning it off? So it might have a structure that the processes above processes above processes. So when we have a consciousness going on, we're running something, and on a lower level, a lot of other processes are going on too. So if somebody turned it off, and if a lower process is turned off, then all the higher level processes also shrink to non-existence. Although some people have different assumptions saying, "Oh,
yeah, but
after you die, and your consciousness is
No.
still somewhere in the
No.
quantum world."
the mystery here is, Jason, is you're using the descriptor higher and lower.
Or
But it's not.
sequence. I mean, who comes the first? I mean, before you have your this thing called consciousness, first you have to have your biological processes going on, right?
Okay. Now let's say that if there's a chemical switch, there's a switch which will put you to sleep. At the right time, when you're in need of some kind of rest, and it'll do that. And then when you're rested, you'll wake up again. You'll switch. It needs to refresh you
and
when
who is in control of that process? I mean, your biological process is going on there, right? It's without your control and without your free will. It is something.
You're not there. That's why you're not conscious. You're not conscious with another human being. You're not there. You're just your body. But the body is doing all sorts of amazing stuff. And it's all automatic. I mean, if things are all, so much in the body is automatic. And if things go a bit wrong, then there's not a lot anyone can help you. As my stroke doctor told me a few weeks ago now, he said, we know very, very little about the brain. He's my doctor.
That's not quite true, but there's a lot we need to know a lot more, and we need to understand how it works, but we do know a lot about the brain.
Well, I would have to have a chat, so you can explain to me why my brain is doing all the things it's doing at the moment. But yeah, you can say there's a fault. There's faults, but it's not predictable.
Yeah.
And some days the headache, someday the pain is on my left side of my face, sometimes it's on my right side. I mean, And that's apart from the visual images as well, which I experienced. I've been in a real mess for weeks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not very nice. But
Sorry.
thank you for today. It wasn't in my diary. I don't know how I missed it. I really don't. I'm not normally that sloppy, but I am at the moment. I'm sloppy. I'm a danger to myself pretty well. But it's been a pleasure to be here, Peter.
And likewise for me as well. Thank you for engaging in this discussion.
Yeah.
So we have to push the book, right?
By all means. By all
Next
means.
month, we'll argue next.
Now I must make it. So I'll send you a paper.
Thank
for
you.
Peter. For Peter.
Can you send it to all of us?
How do I do that?
No,
You just have this. You send it to me. I will pass them.
I'll send it to. I mean, I could write. I possibly do have all your emails. Who's here? Is it just
Garage,
you?
Jason, Peter, yourself, and we have guests not saying anything yet.
I don't say anything. Hi, I'm here, Bernard.
Yeah.
I was listening, but I have a problem with my voice. I am very, I don't know how you say in English. Okay, I was learning a lot, listening to your talks.
Well, it's been quite specialist today in terms of about brain and consciousness. I mean,
Yeah,
many people perform quite happily as cyberneticians without referring to consciousness.
mhm.
They just return to social. They just refer to social systems. How nice to see you, Cariani.
Okay.
You really must speak to me sometime while I'm still here. Can we finish now, please, Jason?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for today.